Hello, glad to see you on my channel. I really value it. And today I want to share with you a wonderful story. It's a dramatic story that will come as a total shock to everybody. It is a really amazing story. So enjoy watching it.
Jane came home for winter break and was happy. After all, she met again with her parents and younger sister Mary with her grandmother. The girl did not warn her family about her arrival and anticipated how mom and dad would scold her naively that, did not inform. Everything turned out as Jane thought. As soon as she opened the gate to the yard, a dog named Rex barked, and the dog informed the household that they had guests. The girl laughed and spoke softly. "Rex, it's me, and you don't recognize me again. And I was only gone for 6 months. You naughty boy." The dog, hearing the familiar voice, happily flicked his tail and stopped barking, but only whined. However, the dog was already heard at home, and the owner of the house, Charlie, Jane's father, came out onto the terrace. The head of the family raised his glasses and spoke sternly, looking at the girl who had entered. "Who is it that has brought you out at night?" "Dad, it's me, Jane." Holding back laughter, the girl said and rushed to her father. "You naughty girl." With a smile, the man replied and hugged his daughter while saying, "And why without warning? Mother would have at least prepared something tasty for this occasion." "Daddy, I came not to eat to you, but only to hug your relatives, because I missed you very much," kissing her father, said the girl. And at that moment, a girl of 14 years old came out of the house. It was Jane's sister. She instantly shouted, "Yay, Jane's here." "Quiet, you crazy girl, you'll wake up the whole village," father said. The three of them went into the house where Charlie's wife, Catherine, and her mother, Nicole, were rushing toward them. Both women shook their hands. They, too, had not expected Jane's arrival. Then came the questions to the girl, who began to talk about herself. Jane told about her life, about her studies, but she kept one thing secret, that now she had a boyfriend. She was afraid to talk about the young man as she knew him little, and her parents had strict rules. They believed that if a girl accepted a guy's advances, he immediately became a potential groom and should meet her parents. Jane realized that this was long ago a relic of the old, but she could not cross her relatives, as she herself was brought up in this spirit. Soon the family celebrated the new year, and Jane excused herself from her parents to her friend Sarah, who used to live in their village, but had recently moved to a small town about 2 hours away from them by car. Her mother and father didn't mind. After all, they knew about the friendship of the two girls since high school. However, the grandmother was against the event, saying to her granddaughter, "Don't you dare have a sleepover with Sarah. It won't do you any good." "Grandma, but don't be ridiculous. I'm a pretty grown-up person. I'm 6 months out of medical school. I'm no match for my sister, who only thinks about boys," the girl said sarcastically. "Don't be sarcastic. She's an adult, you see," Nicole said glumly. She continued, "If I say don't go, it's for a reason. My gut says don't go. I told you not to go." "Oh, come on. I thought you and I understood each other better than that. My parents gave me permission, and let's not talk about this anymore. You better teach my sister some sense," said the girl mischievously, and ran to pack, leaving her grandmother in sorrowful reflection. Nicole looked at the trail of her granddaughter, and she became anxious. The old woman tried to influence her daughter Catherine, but she only waved her away, saying, "Again, you and your visions. You're already considered abnormal in the village, and you still can't get your mind right. If my visions were as stupid as you say, people wouldn't come to me," Nicole said angrily. "Mom, give me a break. My husband and I let our daughter go, and let's close this topic," irritatedly spoke Catherine. The old woman in response only sighed. Nicole in the village was considered a special inhabitant, and it is for the eyes she was called the seer, because she could foresee the event. But still the villagers shunned her, despite this gift. The native daughter, even embarrassed by these abilities of her mother, and often asked her mother to stop doing this business. Meanwhile, Jane was already going to her friend, whom she had warned in advance about her arrival. The girl packed quickly, and before slipping out of the house, she heard her mother lecture her on honor. Jane answered her mother that she remembered everything and quickly jumped out of the door. After a while, the girl was already sitting at Sarah's house and talking about her life. She immediately frankly confessed to her friend, "I have a boyfriend, His name is Tom. Well, quickly tell me about him. I did not expect from you. You could. And on the phone at least one word to hint, said her friend, offended. It's uncomfortable on the phone. Well, do not pout. I'll tell you everything. In general, met him by chance on the street. Some scumbags were picking on me and he stepped in. Tom is 4 years older than me, works as an office manager, lives with his parents. I'd already met them and they're decent people, Jane said quietly. Well, that makes sense. Was there something between you two already? Excitedly asked the interlocutor. You are only interested in one thing, Jane said with a laugh. Naturally, this is the most important detail in relationships with guys, Sarah said seriously. Oh, come on, we've only kissed a couple of times. You know what kind of traditions I was brought up in. So no bed scenes until the wedding, Jane said. That's the way we were raised in the country. I don't think it's right. You should get to know a guy before marriage in every way. Or what if it turns out later that you are not suitable for each other, said Sarah pompously. The girls argued about it for a long time and finally quarreled. Jane was not on a joke angry and immediately went home. Her parents tried to stop her, saying that it was almost midnight and it was very dangerous to go back in the dark. However, Jane was strongly offended by her friend, and even reasonable arguments did not stop her. The girl assured Sarah's parents that she would take a cab and would soon be home. Jane walked at a brisk pace to the cab stand. She was in a bad mood, as she had to return home at night from her friend because of a stupid quarrel. The girl was also angry at the weather. It was January outside and it was raining instead of snowing. Jane had to walk a few meters to the parking lot, where there were several cars, as suddenly a Jeep stopped in front of her and a man's head stuck out the open window. The stranger spoke affably. Where is the beauty in a hurry at night? I need a cab to get home. So sit down, tell me the address, and I'll take you home with a breeze. The man offered, examining the girl from head to toe. But you are not a cab driver, Jane said, a little confused. She was uncomfortable at being so openly scrutinized. What does it say on a cab driver's forehead who he is? Laughing, said the stranger and continued. Come on, get in. I guarantee that I'll drive you comfortably. Jane thought for a few moments and then accepted the offer. She thought that she would have to take a cab anyway. And here was an opportunity to ride in a Jeep, which she had never driven before. Jane got into the vehicle named her Village. The man asked her what her name was. She said her name. He did not give her name. The car started, the driver whistled something and glanced at her occasionally. They drove for a while, and then the Jeep turned into a deserted alley and stopped. The girl looked at the driver uncomprehendingly, and only she wanted to ask him about the reason for the stop as the stranger pounced on her. Jane tried to scream, but received several slaps. Meanwhile, the man was tearing her clothes. The girl wiggled around, bit her attacker's arm, and was immediately hit in the face with a fist. Jane realized that now this man was going to abuse her. She began to tearfully beg him to stop. But the man was only getting more and more turned on by her scenes. The girl desperately tried to break free, but the forces were unequal. It seemed like an eternity to Jane, the whole nightmare lasting. Once the man had satisfied his lust, he smugly said, "It feels good to be first, and you should thank me. Otherwise, who else would be interested in you with such an ugly birthmark?" The girl sobbed quietly, trying to tidy up her torn clothes. She hated the whole world now and wished that what had happened had been a dream, not something that had happened to her. The man, meanwhile, started the car. The car started. They drove out of town. The driver stopped the Jeep and unceremoniously said, "Go on your way, our paths have diverged. But if you want, you can continue the fun. And remember, if anyone picks up on this, I will find you from under the ground, and believe me, it will not show a little." After these words, the man eloquently gestured at his throat. The girl quickly jumped out of the car. She did not want to repeat the horror. Jane rushed away from the Jeep. She ran along the side of the road, convulsively sobbing. The girl was afraid even for a moment to stop. Only when the road turned off did Jane let herself catch her breath. She looked back, afraid to see that ill-fated Jeep again, but it was gone. Jane stepped off the road and sat down on the ground. Only then she gave herself the will to cry. She sobbed and couldn't stop. The hysteria lasted about 15 minutes, and soon she felt that she began to freeze. Realizing this brought her to reality. She jumped up and ran. Now she just wanted to get to her village as soon as possible. Jane, exhausted, came to the house under the morning. The girl went into the yard and knocked lightly on the door. Soon her father appeared on the threshold. He looked with horror at his daughter in tattered clothes. Charlie understood at once. Jane slipped into the house and rushed into the shower room in her room. She threw off her clothes and stood under the running water. At this time, the owner of the house had already woken up his wife and told her about the form in which their daughter had come. Catherine listened silently and tightly pressed her lips and headed for the bathroom. The woman knocked softly and asked Jane to open the door for her. All she heard in response was the sound of water running. Catherine knocked more demandingly. Soon the door fell open and a crying girl in a robe appeared and silently went to her room. Jane was followed by her mother. Catherine demanded an explanation. The daughter threw herself on the bed with tears uttered. "What more needs to be told? Everything is clear. A man mocked me. You were supposed to go to Sarah. How come you're not a guest and you don't know where you're spending your time? Ma, I was at her place, but we had a fight. I decided to go home." Annoyingly squeezed out of herself Jane and told what happened then. The girl expected compassion from her mother, but instead she heard the opposite. "Where were your brains? Going home in the middle of the night. You're a reasonable man. I can see you wanted some fun. Well, you got it. Now the whole neighborhood will know about it. Do you realize how you've embarrassed your father and me?" "Mom, what are you talking about?" "I tried to defend my honor by crying," Jane said. At that moment, grandmother entered the room, who was already aware of the events. The elderly woman sat down to her granddaughter and hugged her affectionately. The old lady gently stroked the girl's wet hair and said something quietly in her ear. And then Nicole turned to her daughter and said, "Why are you torturing her? Don't you see, she's hysterical. She needs help now. And you're driving your own daughter to sin. She's out at night, and I'm supposed to calm her down. You're out of your mind in your old age. What if she brings a baby after that, and it's from who knows who? Then how will you answer to the locals? You'll say that Jane has fathered a child," Catherine said dryly and left the room. The grandmother was left alone with her granddaughter. The old woman calmed Jane as best she could, and then suggested a potion that would make her feel better. The girl agreed, and Nicole hurriedly ran to the kitchen and after a while returned with a mug, which she gave to her granddaughter with the words, "Drink. You will feel better, Blossom. Let's go to the district police officer and apply. It is not good for this scoundrel to walk free or else and other girls spoil. I'm not going to the police, so the whole neighborhood will know about everything," the girl said, frightened, and tears appeared in her eyes again. The grandmother hugged her granddaughter and did not dissuade Jane. The old woman now wanted the girl to forget about this nightmare. Soon Jane fell asleep, and the old woman went to her daughter to talk to her. Nicole wanted Catherine and her husband to convince Jane to go to the police, but the daughter and her husband flatly refused to do so, reasoning that this egregious case would become known to the whole neighborhood. The grandmother tried to make them change their minds, but the couple stood their ground. On the same day, all the family gathered to discuss everything, and the head of the house said sternly, "You must keep quiet about what happened to you. We don't want any shame. And don't forget, you have to come back here soon after your studies. And if people find out about this, they'll point the finger at you. People will turn it around. They'll think you're an easy mark. And don't forget, there's your little sister here, who's innocent. She can take credit for your fame too." "But Daddy, it's not my fault," Jane said with tears in her eyes. "How could it not be your fault?" The girl's mother intervened and continued, "You should have shoved your pride away after the quarrel and stayed the night at Sarah's. And you decided to show your friend how cool you are, so you showed her that now you've lost your innocence." Jane covered her face with her hands and cried. She realized that her mother was right, and it was necessary to stay the night at her friend's house. Nicole saw that her granddaughter was having a very difficult time, and she sternly stated to her daughter, "That's it. Stop torturing the girl. What happened, happened. You can't take it back, but you can't blame Jane for everything. It's not her fault there are scoundrels walking the earth. We'll say no more about it." Jane looked at her grandmother with gratitude, as only Nicole sympathized with her in this situation. Not even her younger sister expressed compassion. She too looked at her reproachfully. Neither did her parents. Jane never left the house after that incident, not until the winter vacation was over. She had to continue her studies. On the eve of her departure, she turned to her grandmother. "Grandma, you support me, but I have something to share with you, and it's very intimate." "Speak, granddaughter, don't be afraid," said the old woman. "You see, I hear from my parents that where I study I have a young man. I already consider him a fiancé. His name is Tom, and he knows that I am not vicious. But I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. It's really bothering me. What can I do? I don't know what to do. Maybe you can tell me," the girl asked with a frown. "So you already have a boyfriend," Nicole said with a smile, and continued, "I'll tell you what, you have to tell him honestly. You can't keep something like that to yourself, especially since you say that he knows that you've never been involved with a man before him. And if a guy really loves you, he'll understand and never reproach you for anything." "Thank you, Grandma. What would I do without you?" said the granddaughter and kissed her grandmother on the cheek. After a while, Jane returned to the city to study. The girl knew that Tom was waiting for her return. She missed him too, but she realized that she had to tell him everything. Jane was afraid of this conversation, but knew that it was necessary to do it every time she met with Tom. The girl intended to tell everything and at the same moment found an excuse to postpone the hated topic. 2 months passed. Jane came from her studies, and one day she felt sick in the morning. She felt dizzy and dizzy. The girl assumed that it was because of yesterday's herring, which she ate for dinner. The day dragged on endlessly for her. She waited for evening to come sooner and she would go to bed. Jane hoped that tomorrow she would feel better. But the next day came. But the nausea didn't stop. The girl completely lost her appetite, and then she decided that she would go to the store after school and buy her favorite tomato juice. However, in the supermarket, seeing the cherished box of juice, she clearly realized that if she took even one sip of this drink, she would simply vomit. And then Jane's fear crept in. Was she pregnant? The girl hurriedly ran to the drugstore and bought a test. She already ran to the dormitory. Throwing her bag into the room, headed hurriedly to the bath. Jane, with a shudder in the shower, conducted the procedure and looked in horror at the 2 blue stripes on the test. There could be no doubt. The results showed that she was in a position. The girl sat on the edge of the bathtub and cried. Jane, she thought, how could it have happened that she had gotten pregnant by that scoundrel? And she also had one thought beating in her mind. Now what should she do next? The girl came to the room depressed, the buddies with whom she was staying, and began to question her about what had happened. However, Jane not mocked and thought with whom she could share her misfortune. With her friend Sarah, she still had not made up. With her parents too, she couldn't talk. She couldn't even tell her boyfriend. The only thing that came to Jane's mind was to take a few days off from college and go home to talk to her grandmother. She was the only one she could confide in. And so it wasn't long before Jane was sitting in the house where her father asked sternly, "What's this sudden arrival? Have you been expelled from college?" "No, my studies are fine. I just missed you, so I thought I'd surprise you." "Lying," the daughter replied. Charlie shrugged, but the man didn't ask any more questions. The mother was wary of her daughter's arrival. Only the grandmother didn't believe her granddaughter's answer and quietly called her into the yard to talk to her. Only the couple went out the door as the old woman turned to the girl. "Their parents, you can carry all sorts of heresy, but not to me. Wait, let me give you another hug. What's wrong with you?" With these words, she enclosed Jane in an embrace and so held on for a few minutes and then let go and whispered, "Oh, Almighty God, let life be born in you." After these words, the girl cried and threw her arms around her grandmother. The girl spoke inaudibly to Nicole. "I do not know how it happened, but the test showed that I am pregnant. And what to do? I just don't know." "I take it you didn't tell your boyfriend?" "No, I've been putting it off and looking for the right time. And now this pregnancy," Jane said, sobbing. "So that's how you tell your parents? You can't terminate the pregnancy because it's your first. Anything can happen, and the boy should be told everything," the old woman said quietly. "Yes, my parents will curse me. How come I'm having a baby without a husband?" the girl said in a wistful voice. Nicole entered the house first, called her daughter and her husband into the kitchen to talk. The older woman said that Jane was in an interesting position. As soon as the head of the household heard this, he screamed in rage. She brought the hymn. We don't need this embarrassment. Let her get rid of the baby. We don't need him here. Take it easy, Charlie. After all, Jane is your daughter and it's not her fault what happened, much less the baby she's carrying. In the future, will you really begrudge a couple of slices of bread to raise a child? Do you realize that it is a sin to get rid of a child? The old woman said with pressure. I said my word. Here will not appear a child without a father fattened. Let her bring up on her own. Charlie said angrily. I won't let Jane get hurt. I am also a member of the family and have the right to vote, said the old woman firmly and left the kitchen, where she saw her granddaughter, who was crying quietly. The girl spoke a little audibly to her grandmother. It is necessary to terminate the pregnancy where I am and with this baby and stranger to me. After all, not from a loved one, and from who knows who. Don't be so hot. I will help you in everything while you have strength. Let's go. I will spread the cards and see what's coming in your life, said the old woman and pulled her granddaughter into her room. Nickel took out a worn deck. She laid out a solitaire card. At this moment, the old woman's lips mumbled something, but the girl did not understand their meaning. Then the old woman asked Jane to pull 3 cards from the deck and put them on the table. The grandmother scrutinized the layout and then said, Girl, a lot of things you will still experience in life, but you will keep the child and love the baby. When the first stirring in the belly catch, it will not be easy in life, but you can be strong because your grandfather's blood is in you. He was a strong-spirited man. God rest his soul. You even inherited his large heart-shaped birthmark above his right eyebrow. The older woman paused for a moment, then continued. In the future, you will only be glad you kept the baby. Why exactly I cannot say, but the cards do not give a specific answer. And you'll meet another one of your abusers, and how you will deal with him will depend only on you. The old woman paused again and then said, One last thing. I have a gift, which is passed down through generations, to predict certain events in life. Your mother won't admit it, but I think it's because she didn't get that ability. That's why she's angry, but that's not the point. Next, you'll be able to predict events, but when it will be revealed in you, God only knows. For this talent to be revealed, there must be an event. It can be love, passion, hate. Personally, I felt that I could predict already at a respectable age when I buried your grandfather. I grieved a lot then, and because of that the gift was awakened in me. My grandmother told me about it earlier, and now I'm telling you about it. But why do you tell me now and not before? She asked in bewilderment. My grandmother told me that this secret can be disclosed only when the granddaughter is pregnant, and in you the life was born. That's why I'm telling you now, Nickel answered. Okay, Grandma, let it be as you say. And Tom, I'll tell him everything when I go back to school. The main thing is that you support me. Stop crying, said the girl. A day later, the girl was leaving. Only Nicole went to see her off. The parents remained in their opinion that the child should be gotten rid of. Catherine tried to influence Jane, saying that a baby without a father is a burden for life, and she will not be able to marry after that. Jane had already made up her mind. Soon the girl was back in her dormitory and the next day went to study. The same day, she decided that she would not delay the conversation with Tom and honestly told him. In the evening, the young people met and Jane told him that she had been attacked by a man in a car. About being in an interesting position at the moment. The guy looked at his passion. He expected everything, but only not this. The girl did not rush in with an answer as she realized that the news was unexpected and unpleasant. When the young man passed the first shock, the man said, "You should have told me everything at once instead of waiting. I feel bad that you hid it from me for so long. But most importantly, I completely agree with your parents. There's no need for a baby. You're young enough to have other children, but by me, not by a bastard. I can't get rid of the baby. It's part of me," Jane said quietly. "It's either me or that thing in your belly. Just think about it. You don't even know what his genes are. He'll probably grow up to be a gangster like his biological father. The stories and prophecies of your grandmother are all speculations," the guy replied dryly. "I didn't think you were so cruel. Grandmother said it right. If a man is worth and loves, he will do anything for his beloved. And you apparently are not one of those. You're making me choose," she said quietly and got up from the bench. She thought it was pointless to talk further, but suddenly she stopped and added, Say hello to your parents for me. They are good people, and good luck to you in life. I think that our paths parted at this point. I have nothing more to say to you." Jane proudly threw her head down and walked away. She felt as if she might cry, but she managed to suppress the urge to let her tears flow. Coming to the dormitory, the girl sighed with relief. Now her soul was clean before Tom, even if they had broken up because of it. Jane registered at the women's clinic, often called her grandmother, talking about the condition. With her parents, the girl communicated less. She made up with Sarah and told her about the pregnancy. The friend long scolded her friend that she did not stay overnight after the unfortunate quarrel. Sarah at the same time vowed that she would support Jane after the birth of the baby, if that wasn't what the parents were going to do. The months flew by. It was time for college graduation. The girl's acquaintances already knew about her pregnancy, as her belly was getting bigger by the day. Jane was looking forward to coming home with a diploma and giving birth soon. The girl in her heart thanked her grandmother for everything and remembered how her relative told her that she would love the baby when she felt the first stirring. Jane had accepted the baby with all her heart, but here that it is the native of her Chad, she realized as soon as there was the first push in the belly. The girl graduated from college and was happy to be on her way home. She did not think that there would be grief in their family. In the yard, Jane saw a coffin in which her beloved grandmother was lying. The girl stopped in a stupor. How could this have happened? She couldn't understand because nothing had been reported to her. Jane rushed to the coffin and screamed desperately. The people standing nearby parted. The villagers noticed that Nicole's granddaughter was in an interesting position. Elderly women on the sidelines murmured. This did not escape the daughter of the deceased. She ran up her lips and looked with dislike at the crying Jane. Meanwhile, the girl was moaning in pain. "Granny, why didn't you wait for me? You promised to help me. How will I be without you now?" Jane wanted to continue, but her father's hand was on her shoulder. The girl raised her head and said, "Why didn't you tell me anything? Had I been a couple days late, and I wouldn't have seen my grandmother off on her last journey. Let's talk about it later. This is not the time and place," the head of the family said glumly. After the funeral, the people dispersed. Jane turned to her parents. She wanted to know why they hadn't called her and informed her about her grandmother's death. The girl's mother frowned and answered in a deep tone. "Grandma died of a heart attack suddenly. No one expected it. Neither she nor we did not inform you, as we knew that you would immediately snap. And we were going to suggest that you don't come at all. Stay in the city where you went to school." "What do you mean? Don't come at all?" "But you are my family. My sister is here," the girl said in bewilderment. "Why should you answer? Didn't you see how our neighbors looked at your belly? They know you're not married. We can already expect contemptuous glances in the back from my father and me." Oh, she remembered her sister. She's gonna be in a lot of trouble. "They'll say she's got a sister of easy virtue," Catherine said sternly. "Mom, Dad, are you throwing me out when I'm going to give you a granddaughter very soon? I even know the sex of the child." Still with the same bewilderment, said Jane. At that moment, the father entered the conversation. He felt sorry for his daughter, but he understood the indignation of his wife. Their family's reputation was at stake. So Charlie spoke up. "We're not disowning you. It's just that your mom is going to tell you how she wants it to be." With these words, the man looked meaningfully at his wife, who understood his gaze. The woman coughed and spoke. "Jane, well, you think of us, of your sister. Mary is just a child, and she'll be teased for you. We suggest you go to another town, get an apartment and give birth there. And we'll say here in the neighborhood that you got married and gave birth to a man, and we'll help you a little with money and the father. It will be the best way out in our case. Go for it." Jane looked from her father to her mother, who were waiting for her decision. The girl could hardly digest what she was hearing. She was being kicked out by her own parents. Jane stood up, a lump in her soul. She thought this is where she should go now on the eve of childbirth. The girl looked at her parents, who silently made it clear that they would not back down, as it was more important for them to be with an untainted reputation. And then Jane saw her sister, who had heard the whole conversation, and she turned to her. "Do you also think I should go off in an unknown direction? Our parents know the right thing to do, and I'm on their side," Mary said quietly. "I see I don't even have to unpack my bags, since I haven't unpacked them since I arrived." Let me spend the night, and I'll leave early in the morning," in a muffled voice said the girl, and went to her room. For a long time she could not sleep. She was troubled by the horror of the unknown. Only in the morning the girl fell asleep and dreamed of her grandmother, who said, "Don't be afraid of anything. I am with you mentally. Ask your mother to give me my prayer book. When it's bad, read it." From this dream, the girl woke up, and for some reason she was relieved by her grandmother's words. Jane turned to her mother for the prayer book. She held it out, and then Catherine pulled out a few bills from her pocket and handed them to her daughter. Hiding her eyes, the woman said quietly, "This is not the first time for you. In a couple of weeks we'll transfer more. You do not judge us harshly. Let the passions settle down now, and then everything will be fine. Call us every week. We'll be worried, horrified." "Hard to believe, but thank you and on it," wistfully replied the daughter. Catherine tried to hug the girl, but this embrace refused. Just kissed her mother on the cheek, and then the father. She went up to her sister, rubbed her on the top of her head, then, wishing everyone good luck, left the parental house. The girl headed towards the stop of the railroad station, musing bitterly about her fate. On the way, she remembered about Sarah and thought that maybe her friend could give her some advice. Jane called her friend and told her everything. And immediately made it clear that she couldn't help in this situation. Jane reached her destination, bought a train ticket to the city where she had just recently graduated from medical school. The girl herself did not understand why she was going there. Suddenly, it occurred to her that she could turn to the janitor at the dormitory where she used to live. It was an elderly woman who was condescending to her. Jane decided that Lara was the name of the employee of the institution, could give her a room for the first time, and then Jane would think of something. Soon the girl was already sitting with the janitor in the dormitory, telling her her plight. The elderly woman was outraged by the behavior of her parents and spoke out sharply. "Oh, what kind of people are they? We do not live in the Middle Ages. Long ago, young guys and girls live in a civil marriage. And how many women give birth to children from lovers and raise them themselves? No, I can't understand my relatives, how my own daughter can be sent away with a pittance to live on. Come on, don't worry about it. I'll think of something. I can't give you a dorm room though. It's strict here, and I value my job." The girl, hearing this answer, became sad, because for her it was the only way out. Lara realized that the girl was upset, so suddenly tapped herself on the forehead and exclaimed, "Ah, the old woman is completely out of her mind. There is a solution to the problem. True, you will not live in luxury apartments, but still not on the street. I'll take you in. I warn you, I'm a strict lady. I like everything to be clean and tidy. I live a little far from here. It takes me 40 minutes by bus to get to work. I have a house with 4 rooms in which I live in one room and my son lives in the other. One goes as a living room, but the 4th is a guest room. Do you agree?" "Of course, excited," said the girl, and then sniggered and continued, "I'm going to have a baby soon, and I have no money to pay." "No problem, you'll be a housewife. You can cook, I think, wash the floors too. You'll be paid. By the way, I'll make you a temporary registration so you get your allowance. In general, we'll live, we won't die," said the old woman, who really felt sorry for the girl. Jane, hearing such a proposal from the janitor, could not stand it and kissed her on the cheek. She had never dreamed of such a thing. And now the girl was already settling in a small room where there was a chest of drawers, a sofa, and 2 tables. Jane excitedly laid out her clothes and then went out to the lady of the house to offer her help, but the woman waved her hand and told her to rest today. Then the girl took out a few bills from her purse, of which she kept 2 for herself, and the rest she gave to the janitor, who looked at the money in amazement and asked, "And what is this?" "Lara, well, you will not always feed me for free. My relatives promised to transfer more money to me soon, and I'll give you more than half again," Jane answered. "Ah, well, put those papers away," the landlady said in a deliberately stern voice and continued. "For the fee, we have already agreed, and you will need money now. After all, the birth of the baby is the purchase of bonnets, onesies, and other things. And God forbid you don't breastfeed, so that's a lot of money." There was a ray of light in her life in the person of this old woman. Lara was preparing dinner, not hurriedly, asked the new resident questions, to which she willingly answered. The conversation between the two women was interrupted by a man's voice. "We have guests, very unexpected and pleasant. This is my son and his name is Jack," Lara said. Then she pointed at Jane and continued. Days flew by. The girl became very friendly with the landlady. They often discussed the birth of a baby girl, to whom the future mother had already given the name Love. With Jack, Jane was less in touch, since the man often came home in a drunken state. At these moments, Lara would sigh and say, "My son's green snake is killing me. How many times I tried to talk to him, but to no avail. He only swears and then comes back on the horns." "Why does Jack drink alcohol?" Jane asked timidly. "He used to be in love with one girl at school, and they already considered themselves bride and groom. But Jack went into the army, and that girl jumped out to marry his friend. It's a corny story. When the son came home from the service, he was furious, but there was nothing he could do about it. Then Jack married that girl to spite her. They lived only 3 years and separated. It wasn't a good marriage. I sinfully thought that he had forgotten his high school love and sighed quietly." Lara sighed and was silent. "And then what happened next?" "Jack accidentally met with this girl and the passion between them broke out. By that time, this young lady had already divorced. Her son started dating her, and after a month, the slut fought Jack back. She was seeing someone else. He's been addicted to alcohol ever since," the old woman said. "Well, he should be treated then," Jane said firmly. "Yes, I tried everything, even went to the grandmothers. They talked him up, all to no avail. He would need a good woman to take him in check." With these words, Lara looked meaningfully at the girl. Jane understood this look perfectly well, but pretended that she didn't understand the janitor's hint. The young woman settled in perfectly at the new place, but she did not forget to call her parents. However, the calls were short. For 2 months, her father and mother transferred money only once, and even then a small amount, but Jane was happy, and these small crumbs spent the finances on her daughter's dowry. Unnoticeably came the time of labor, and the young woman was taken to the maternity hospital. Soon a healthy baby girl was born. Jane was taken from the maternity hospital by Lara and her son. The old woman proudly handed the young mother a huge bag with dowry for the baby. The girl was touched and thanked the janitor from the bottom of her heart, promising that she would definitely thank her in the future. Jane received a text message from her parents, in which it was written, "Congratulations on the birth of your daughter. Kisses from your family." The girl was upset by such a dry congratulations from her parents. She still dreamed of parental affection and care. Aunt Lara saw that Jane suffered from the lack of care from her relatives and tried to be very attentive to her. It had been 2 months since the young woman had become a mother. She quickly got rid of the "And what is in your plans?" The old woman didn't stop. "Aunt Lara, I want to continue my studies and become a doctor, namely a surgeon. When Love will be a little older, I will start preparing for higher education," Jane said seriously. "That's a very wonderful wish. I'm in favor of having a medical worker with a higher education living here. But as far as personal life is concerned, it should not be put on the back burner. Time is fleeting. I just gave birth to Jack, and he's already a handsome gentleman. By the way, why don't you pay attention to him? He's like a boy when he sees you," Lara said with a sneer. "Where are you going with this?" "Have you decided to become a matchmaker?" said the girl, laughing. "Well, don't be clever, but look at Jack," seriously said the janitor. She hoped that a little conversation about her son would be a push for Jane to pay attention to the guy. Time passed and soon Love's birthday was approaching. She was going to turn 1 year old. Jane decided to go to her parents' house to show her daughter in person instead of in pictures. Lara was against the trip, as she was afraid that the young woman would stay there and never come back. However, her predictions were wrong. Jane warned her parents in advance she was met, but for some reason the girl did not feel that her mother and father were waiting for her to visit. Jane did not understand the aloofness. She was not told barbs, but she did not hear any affectionate words. Her granddaughter was also treated with restraint by her parents. The girl stayed in the house for 2 days and, referring to urgent matters, left. A very different reception awaited her at Lara's. The woman, in honor of Jane's arrival, baked a goose in the oven, fried pies with cabbage, and opened the pickles. The girl was pleasantly surprised, and on the doorstep she was met by Jack with a huge bouquet of flowers. "These are the most beautiful girls on the planet," he said to her. "Oh, don't be silly." Embarrassed, said Jane, and accepted the bouquet. Soon the lady of the house invited everyone to the table. Lara asked the girl about the meeting with her parents, but she quickly changed the subject. And then the young woman said that as soon as her daughter was a year and a half old, she would put her in a nursery and she herself would go to medical school. Jack asked politely, "What exactly you want to be?" "I want to save lives. I dream of being a first-class surgeon," embarrassed girl replied. "What's a nursery for?" Lara exclaimed and continued. "There's nothing for such a little girl to do there at this age. She will cough later. Yes, sneezing, and you in the pharmacy for medicines to run. I've been retired for a long time, and I work part-time in the dormitory to socialize with people. I'm gonna quit my job and stay home, so I'll have a new job to take care of Love. We'll read stories and play with dolls. Anyway, what we're gonna do about it, you go ahead and get in and do your schooling." "I'm kind of embarrassed. You've done so much for me already," Jane said tearfully. "Mother's right. She'll take care of Love, and you go to school. And don't shed tears." Jack's voice sounded. "Thank you both, but at least I'll try to get a job. And if I get in, I'll study in the morning and work in the evenings to make a penny," she said. "No part-time jobs. There's a man in the house, so he has to provide for the family," Jack said in a deliberately serious voice and looked at the young woman. He used the word family on purpose to see Jane's reaction, who understood the meaning of what he said and smiled in response. After this conversation, Jack began to openly court her. She didn't resist, but she didn't give any hope for a relationship either. The man, on the one hand, it made him angry, but on the other hand, turned on, he wanted to achieve his own. Literally a month later, Jack realized that Jane gives up positions, and soon he kissed her for the first time. The girl long dared to take this step, as she was not sure of her feelings for the son of Aunt Lara, but at the same time, he was not disgusting to her. Jane herself could not understand why she reciprocated. After a while, the young people were already sharing a bed. Lara was happy. She had long dreamed of seeing the girl as her daughter-in-law, and now it was just around the corner. The elderly woman waited for the couple to apply to the registry office to become a full-fledged family. And that day came. 3 adults gathered around the table, and Love was playing on the floor with cubes. Out of the blue, the man said, "Mom, I proposed to Jane." She said yes. The young woman was not yet ready for the pensioner to learn about this news, so she looked at Jack. Aunt Lara exclaimed enthusiastically, "I finally waited for this. Congratulations to you both from the bottom of my heart." "Thank you, Aunt Lara," Jane said shyly. "Stop calling me Auntie now. From now on, I am your mother and you are my daughter." The older woman said happily and added, "So now Love will have our last name. You're going to adopt her son, aren't you?" Jack was embarrassed, but he had no intention of recognizing Love as his daughter. Jane sensed the awkward moment and came to the man's rescue. "Aunt Lara, Love will stay under her last name. That's what Jack and I decided. You're calling me Auntie again. All right, well, it's up to you about the baby. Although I think that while the girl is small, it is better to let her call her father Daddy," said the old woman. Soon Jane was lying in bed with Jack. The groom had long since fallen asleep, and the girl kept thinking whether she had done the right thing to agree with the man. But then her thoughts turned to the fact that she should notify her parents about it. Perhaps this news would change their attitude. The next day, the young woman called her mother and told her that she was getting married very soon. Jane asked if they would come to the wedding. Catherine referred to the business at work and suggested that the young people themselves visit them in the village. Jane agreed to her mother's proposal. A month later, the couple signed, celebrated the celebration in a small cafe, and 3 days after the marriage ceremony, the young family has already arrived at Jane's father's house. The girl proudly sat with her husband on the couch, holding her daughter on her lap. The parents asked the couple various questions, to which they leisurely answered. Then Jane asked her husband to stay with her relatives, and herself said that she wanted to check her grandmother's grave, and no one was against it. The girl quickly went to the cemetery, found the grave. She sat down on a bench. She looked at the pictures of her grandmother and tears flowed from her eyes. The girl wiped them away. In a quiet voice, she said, "Hello, Grandma. I've come to visit you. I'm sorry I haven't been here for a long time, but I live in another city. I want you to be happy for me. Now I have a full-fledged family, a husband, a beloved daughter. I remember you very often and even sometimes talk to you, but only you do not answer me. I remember perfectly your revelation that soon I will have the same gift as you, but it hasn't happened yet. I thought it would happen when my daughter was born, but there was no miracle. Then I thought I'd get married and then it would happen, but again, nothing." Here the girl was silent, and it seemed that someone was calling her, but there was silence. After a few moments of silence, she spoke again. "Perhaps these are not the emotions that the gift in me woke up, but I sincerely love my daughter and was happy when the baby was born. In regard to my husband, I can't say anything. I like him, but do I love him? I'm not sure. You'll ask me why I married this man, but even here I won't give you an answer because I don't know." At that moment, the girl heard her name again. Jane rose from the bench and looked around, but no one was there. She was a little frightened, and then thought that perhaps it was a sign that she would soon become the owner of a gift like her grandmother's. After that, the girl hurried to her husband to say goodbye, promising her grandmother that she would visit her again soon. Jane and her family stayed at her parents' house for 2 days, then left. The girl could not talk to her mother in confidence. She felt again that she was leaving, not from her father's home, but from some strangers. The young woman chased these thoughts away from herself, tried to believe that her parents loved her as much as her younger sister. But this faith faded with each meeting or call. The family returned home. Jane began preparing for the entrance exam for medical school. The young woman passionately wanted to fulfill a cherished dream. It seemed to her that as soon as she studied, her parents would change their attitude towards her. And Jane succeeded. The girl entered the institute. Time moved on. Jack worked. Lara babysat Love, and Jane studied diligently. A few years flew by, and the girl went to kindergarten. Jane graduated from the institute and got a job as a surgeon in a hospital. She still called her parents and reported her news, but she did not feel any emotion on the other end of the wire. A year passed as the young woman worked, and once, coming from duty, heard a conversation between her mother-in-law and her son. Lara said quietly, "It's time for you to have a second child. Even though I already have a granddaughter, Love, but she needs a brother or sister." "Well, these questions are not for me. I talked to my wife about it, but she won't answer. She says it's not the right time." "Let me talk to her," the woman said softly. "Oh, do whatever you want," the man said indifferently. Jane coughed softly to let the household know she was coming. The lady of the house came out into the hallway and joyfully began to talk about Love's accomplishments to date. Lara called her sister-in-law over for dinner. Jane wanted to invite the rest of the family, but the pensioner said that they had already eaten. The two women sat down in the kitchen, and the mother-in-law did not put off the conversation for later, and directly asked, "Daughter, you have lived together for so many years, and you have no children. It seems to me that now is the right time, while I still have the strength to help raise them." "Mom, I guess it's time, but it's not working out," Jane replied tiredly. She didn't feel like talking about it. "You're a doctor. Take and go to the clinic to consult in this matter. Perhaps you need to take some vitamins, and then, God willing, everything will work out," Lara said quietly. "Okay, Mom. I will do so in the near future," the woman said and started to eat dinner. But time passed, and Jane was in no hurry to go to the antenatal clinic. At that moment, she herself did not realize whether she wanted children or not. And plus, this spouse began to attach to a small, occasionally to alcohol. This circumstance frightened Jane. Because of this green snake in the family, occasionally happened conflicts on an empty place. Lara could see that the couple was no longer living the ideal that had been there from the beginning. She ventured to speak to her sister-in-law again. The elderly woman told Jane that the conflicts were due to the fact that Jane lived only for her work and had very little time with her husband. The pensioner talked a lot more and for a long time, and at the end she added that Love was about to turn 9 and she was still the only child in the family. Jane perfectly understood the hint of her mother, but did not say anything in response. And soon there was another scandal between the spouses, in which Jack accused his wife of coldness and inability to give him a son. Jane was furious at these words and also said a lot of unpleasant things. The woman felt terrible after the spat. She took out her grandmother's prayer book and a note fell out of it, which was written in her grandmother's hand. The message said, "When life seems completely silly and absurd, then don't throw mud on everyone, but try to understand yourself. Maybe you've done something wrong yourself, and now you want to find someone to blame? Think about it, my favorite granddaughter." Jane looked at the piece of paper with bewilderment. For as many times as she leafed through it, it did not have this message. The woman waved her head and she thought it was some kind of obsession. But then she found a reasonable explanation for it, that perhaps it was her own fault for not finding this note because she had been leafing through the book inattentively. Jane thought about her grandmother's message and suddenly realized that she herself was to blame for what was happening in her family. And her husband was right. Jane was so stunned by the discovery, because the whole truth lay on the surface. The woman simply didn't love Jack, married only in gratitude to Lara, who had not abandoned her in her hour of need. Only now Jane realized that she did not want to share the family bed with her husband. The young woman faced a question and how to live on when there is no love. Jane realized that if she told about her decision to divorce her mother-in-law, it would be a stab in the back for the old woman. The girl agonizingly searched for a way out. She knew that she did not want to live like this. While Jane herself and winded thoughts, Jack left the house, shouted to the housemates that it would be late tonight. The mother-in-law and daughter-in-law knew what that meant. Jack would go to a bar and drink alcohol until he was drunk. Jane, on the other hand, decided it was best to take her mind off things for the moment. Talked to her daughter about her progress at school. It was close to 10 o'clock p.m. Love was asleep in her room, and the two women were watching the show and waiting for Jack to return. Each of them wondered in what condition the man would come. But then the phone rang. Jane on her cell phone. She glanced at the number. Unknown. A woman answered. "Hello, I'm listening." "Is this Jane?" An unknown male voice answered briefly. "Yes, it's me. To whom do I have the honor of speaking?" Jane answered and felt a chilling coldness clutching her heart. "The thing is that your husband was hit by a car and died at the scene. We found your number on the cell phone. Come to the identification," said a man's voice, and then told where to go. Jane looked at her mother-in-law. She didn't know how to report it, but the pensioner understood and clutched at her heart. Jane quickly called an ambulance. The elderly woman was hospitalized, and then everything was a blur. The lineup, the funeral. Lara was unable to say goodbye to her son as she had a heart attack that day. The woman was in intensive care when Jack was buried. Jane immediately went to check on the elderly woman after the funeral and wake. And Lara wasn't better until 4 days later. The old woman had aged right before her eyes. Jane looked at her mother-in-law with pain. She saw how the woman was devastated by the loss of her son, but she could not alleviate her suffering. She only stroked Lara's arm. A few days later, Jack's mom was discharged. Jane picked her up from the hospital. The two women sat at home at the table, looking at the picture of the dead man. Suddenly, her mother-in-law asked her quietly, "You're not going to leave me?" "What kind of stupid questions are these?" "A question for a question," Jane replied. "You're not fooling me, daughter. I know you didn't love my son in the slightest. You married him out of gratitude to me. I could see that because a woman in love with a man has a special look in her eye. You didn't have that." Jane was silent. She had nothing to say. She did not want to deceive Lara, as she loved her as her own mother. The pensioner raised her eyes and looked at her sister-in-law with a hard stare, tears rolling from her eyes. The girl jumped up from the chair, hugged her mother with the words, "I will not leave you. You replaced my mother and loved my grandmother. And where will we go without you? Don't even think that we'll leave this house. We'll stick together." "Thank you, daughter. Thank you for your kind heart. This is your home. You knew it would be yours," and Love whispered to Lara. 2 months after Jack's funeral, the widow and mother of the deceased, as well as Love, were learning to live without a male helper. Jane, to avoid blaming herself for her husband's death, began to stay at work more and more late. She believed that on that fateful day was partly involved in the death of her husband, because there was a big quarrel between them, and Jane said too much unnecessary, thereby giving another reason for Jack to drink alcohol. Once again, reflecting on the subject, she shared it with her mother-in-law, who listened attentively. As soon as Jane finished her narration, then Lara sternly said, "I don't want to hear any more of this nonsense. Yes, he is my son. And no matter how nasty he is to me, he's a bloodline. But I won't let you beat yourself up about it." Jack didn't get a mouthful. He went to the bar and started drinking. And it was his choice to nourish his grief. And as monstrous as it sounds, it was his own stupidity that killed him. If he was sober, he wouldn't have been hit by a car. And another thing, you didn't go out that day after the fight and drink hard liquor. That's your conclusion. "Thank you, Mom. It's like you've taken a stone off my soul," quietly said the daughter-in-law. The girl really felt better after this conversation. She regretted that she had not talked to Lara like that before. A year had passed since Jack's death. Jane was still working at the hospital. Her daughter was in school. The retired woman was at home taking care of the household. And one day, Jane came home in a bad mood. The mother-in-law had already studied her daughter-in-law well, and Jane had something to say, but she did not want to answer. Lara didn't insist. Jane hadn't found herself in the mood for a long time. It was obvious that something was eating her up. Finally, she couldn't bear it and turned to her mother-in-law. "My mother called me today and asked me to take my little sister under my wing." "What do you mean, take her under her wing? She's an adult. She's not 15 years old. Anyway, she wants to go to the big city. I mean here. She's tired of living in the country, and here I am. So her mother asked me to take Mary in. I told her that the house was not mine, and my mother immediately started begging me to help, because she and my father were worried about Mary." Jane said nervously and added, "I might have asked you for that favor, but Mary is a spoiled girl, and at the same time I can't refuse her parents after all. They have come to me for help." The old woman, as soon as she heard the words of her daughter-in-law, boiled, and even an emotion rose from the table, waving her hands, saying that it is necessary to be such insolent people. I'm sorry, daughter, they are your parents and they should be honored in any case. But how can they ask for such a thing when they themselves at one time threw out their own daughter with a belly in an unknown direction and not even really interested in her affairs? And now that you're on your feet and earning good money, they need your help to bring up a grown-up sister. I can't understand that. And your mother Teresa, I understand helping your parents financially, but looking after a spoiled brat is too much. Besides, your Mary wasn't exactly interested in your affairs." Jane listened to this angry dialogue and suddenly laughed. Her mother-in-law looked at the girl with bewilderment, but she could not take in a clue what was so funny said. Daughter-in-law vision and understanding of the older woman even more amused, only when stopped laughing, Jane said, "You spoke so emotionally. It was truly hilarious. If I'd known you'd react so violently, I wouldn't have told you about the call. I understand your outrage, but I can't stay away. They're my family." "I understand all that, daughter, but I don't want to put up with a spoiled brat, especially since love lives here. And I wouldn't want her to take a bad example from Mary. But it's up to you, because this is your home, and you're the rightful owner. But I warn you that if Mary comes to us, I won't let her get away with it," Lara said sternly. "Let's do it another way. Mary will not live here. I care more about your nerves and your sick heart. I'll just get my sister an apartment and make her get a job. She'll be on probation for 3 months, and if she's going to live like she did at home, partying with boys, I won't help her anymore." "That's fine," Jane said. "But only if that's the way it is, then there's no objection. But look, I heard that only 3 months and no more, and that's a lot. A month would have been enough." Jane called her mother that same day and told her of her decision. Catherine thanked her dryly and said that Mary was leaving in 2 days, and she must be met, since the girl did not know the city and could get lost. Jane mentally laughed at this and then thought bitterly that when she was pregnant, when she was kicked out of her father's house, they did not care about her so much. Soon Mary rented a 1-room apartment. She warned her that she had 3 months to find a job, and added that she could arrange a nanny in her hospital. However, Mary grimaced and said, "I still only have to pull the ship out from under the sick. No, 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 no. I want a decent job. You should have gone to college instead of dancing. I finished a course in nail extensions and didn't even succeed. Everywhere you have to work hard, not do nothing. Anyway, I gave you 3 months' notice, Jane said sternly and left her sister alone in the apartment. Jane assumed that Mary would not want to work, and so it turned out to be. The younger sister called 2 weeks later to say she needed money. Jane wondered where the parents' finances had gone, but Mary told her that prices were exorbitant here in the city, and to find a job, you have to take a lot of transportation. It's all lies. Jane listened and reported that quite a bit and advised to spend sparingly, since she does not earn $1 million. This conversation between the two sisters was heard by Lara, who also realized that Mary would not be looking for a job and she had only come here to have fun. The older woman shook her head, but didn't say anything about it to her sister-in-law. Jane had already realized it perfectly well herself, so she called her mother and said, "I cannot support my sister as I am raising my daughter on my own, and my mother-in-law only helps me. And I don't want to spend money on partying. You're my sister. How can you refuse to help? Aren't you ashamed? Your father and I raised you and finished a piece of bread so that you could study at the medical school." Catherine said angrily, "Mom, let's not talk about this. If you need help, I'll help you. But only if my sister gets her mind right. Otherwise, I'll start helping you, and you'll be giving to Mary." With these words, Jane disconnected the connection. She felt tormented because she had spoken rudely, but she could find no other way out. Soon, Mary went to her parents, but at the same time, having said to her older sister a lot of unflattering things in her address, a few more years passed. Love was in the 6th grade. Jane continued to work as a surgeon at the hospital. All she knew was work and housework. Her mother-in-law was worried about her, and she absolutely lived only for them, and did not organize her personal life. Lara decided to talk reluctantly. She spoke to Jane when the woman came home from work. "Daughter, I really appreciate that you are doing well at work and being the caring mother. But there's one thing I'd like to say to you. You see, life goes on and you're alone all the time. You can't do that. You should go out with a friend and have some fun. Maybe you'll meet a man." "Mom, are you talking nonsense? I'm happy with my life as it is. I don't need any men." Pompous, Jane said, and she was annoyed by this talk. Somewhere in her soul, Jane dreamed of a big, bright love. "It's not me talking heresy, it's you, daughter. You can't ruin yourself. You're still young, and you look good. Let's stop this conversation. I'm begging you. Let's talk about this topic later," said her sister-in-law, a little irritated. After this conversation, 3 months passed, and Jane was at work. She was finishing another duty. The woman dreamed of coming home sooner, to lie down to rest, as she was very tired that day. As soon as the shift was over, the woman hurried to leave the hospital and hurriedly headed to the cab stand. Jane did not allow herself to drive cars home, as she considered it an unacceptable luxury. Although at that time she was already earning good money, but that day she was very tired at work and spit on her principles. Jane went to the nearest car and opened the door, where she saw a man who, leaning on the roll, was dozing. The girl stood for a few moments, but seeing that her driver ignored her, decided to use another car. And only she wanted to close the door, as the chauffeur pronounced without raising his head. "And for a long time we'll be thinking, get in the car and command an address." "I thought you were asleep, and you don't care about passengers," said Jane. And the turkey thought so too. "Madam, do you know what happened to the bird? I'm listening to you. Where do you want me to take you?" The man, who had already raised his head and was looking at the woman, said, "Let's not get familiar. There are a lot of cars around, as well as cab drivers, so I can find another cabbie." "Oh, you, madam with the temper. It's a good deal. Sit down and dictate the address." The woman got into the car, named the street and the house. The car sped off. They drove on without speaking, and only when there were a few minutes left to the destination, the man asked if it was possible to get acquainted with her. The passenger replied with a refusal. She absolutely did not want to communicate with this man. The driver did not insist, and soon they reached their destination. Jane paid. She got out of the car. She had already forgotten about this man when she got home. However, Jane was to meet this man one more time, and it happened the next day when the woman finished work, left the hospital, and went to the bus stop. but a male silhouette appeared in front of her, blocking the road. Jane looked at the man and was surprised to recognize the driver who had given her a ride home yesterday. The man held a bouquet of roses in his hand and held it out to her. Representatives of the stronger sex tried to get acquainted with her, but not on the street. Meanwhile, the man, smiling, said, "Alex, whom you accused yesterday of familiarity, let me give you a ride home today, but without payment. And why such grace towards me?" Without a smile, the woman said sternly, "I like you, and don't I have the right to make pleasant to the person I sympathize with?" The stranger said, "You have an interesting way of making acquaintances, but it didn't work on me. Now let me pass." "My husband is waiting for me at home," said Jane, still sternly. "Didn't anyone ever tell you that it's not nice to lie to strangers?" The man asked. "What makes you think so? Did you see that the wedding ring was on the wrong hand for a married woman?" "Well, I commend you for being observant. You're right, I'm not married, but I have a boyfriend who's waiting for me at home," she said a little sarcastically. "This has nothing to do with your ring. I am now asking you to show mercy to the gentleman, because while we bicker with you, my iron horse can be arrested. It's parked in the wrong place." And with these words, the man pointed to the side where the car was parked. Jane suddenly laughed, which she had not done for a long time in the presence of the male sex, and moved resolutely toward the car. The two of them approached the car. The woman, without asking, opened the door and got in. The driver took the chauffeur's seat and remarked with surprise, "You are not only a beautiful woman, but also brave. What makes you think so? You just got into the car. What if it's not mine?" "It is. I'm also observant, because I remembered your car yesterday," Jane said cheerfully, and she suddenly noticed that she was flirting with the stranger. The man smiled back at her and started the car, and then they drove off. On the way, the couple got acquainted. Jane learned that the driver's name is Alex, works as a cab driver. He's 33 years old. When he said how old he was, he also joked that he was the age of Christ. The woman felt such an ease of communication with her new acquaintance that it seemed to her that he was the white prince who had finally found her and would save her from loneliness. When they arrived at Jane's house, she did not want to part with him. The girl offered the first one a ride and was not refused. The couple drove around the city for a long time. The woman even forgot about the time. She was reminded of this by a phone call. It was a call from her mother-in-law, who had been waiting for her daughter-in-law at home for a long time, and she was not there. Jane, without thinking, lied that today was a difficult day at work. She had to stay late. The girl promised that she would be home very soon. The woman reluctantly parted with new acquaintances. The man was also reluctant to let her go. Jane promised Alex that they would meet again tomorrow. The woman flew home promptly. She was in a good mood. Her mother-in-law noticed it immediately and asked, "Do you by any chance have a promotion? Because you're all glowing." "Come on, Mom, what kind of promotion?" "Just a patient went on the mend and from this good mood." "Lie," said the woman. She did not want at the moment to devote to her mother-in-law her amorphous affairs, namely that she liked the man. The next day, Jane met up with Alex again, and again she was late home. And then it started to happen more and more often. Lara could see that there was a change in her daughter-in-law's life. The old woman had already guessed that her daughter-in-law had a man. After another late arrival, the pensioner, as if casually, said, "Maybe you can already bring to meet your young man, because you invent elaborate reasons for your tardiness, like a schoolgirl." "Mom, what are you talking about? I'm really late for work," Jane said. "That's what I believed. The beautiful car that comes here every day is also a coincidence. And I also have bad eyesight, since my daughter comes out of that car. But I must be mistaking her for someone else," the mother-in-law said, smiling. "You can't hide anything from you. You are like Mata Hari," said the daughter-in-law, laughing. And then the young woman vowed that she would bring a man to meet her very soon. Jane herself realized that it was not a good idea to meet Alex secretly, but she waited for him to take the initiative. But the guy was in no hurry to do it. And then the girl decided that she had to talk to Alex about it. Another meeting, Jane asked a direct question: why Alex is not burning desire to get acquainted with her relatives. She waited for an honest answer from the chosen one. But the man did not want to answer. When the woman did not pay attention to this, she thought that the beloved was not yet ready for this. However, after meeting with Alex, 3 months have passed, and he still did not hurry to meet with his mother-in-law and her daughter. Jane, in my heart, I was worried about this and really wanted to create a family with her lover. And the woman also madly dreamed of getting pregnant from Alex, but she did not succeed. Jane decided to visit a women's counseling center. After examination, she learned that she can no longer have children. For the woman, this news came as a great shock. After all, she had nothing wrong with her health. She leads a healthy lifestyle. And now this diagnosis. Jane sat at home and thought sadly about what she had learned from the doctors. And then her grandmother's prayer book caught her eye. The woman took the book in her hands, pressed it to her chest, and immediately remembered her grandmother's words. "You won't regret not getting rid of that child." It had been said about love, and it hit Jane. Why had a relative said that? She knew then that after her daughter was born, Jane would never be able to have children again. The woman only now realized why Nicole hadn't immediately told the whole truth then, but no longer wanted to traumatize her then. Jane was in a state of prostration. She would not be able to give the man she loved a child. She herself would not be able to become a mom again. The woman decided that she needed to banish these thoughts, and it would be easier to do it if she just took a walk around the city. Not thinking long, she quickly dressed, warned her mother-in-law and daughter that she would be away for a while. Jane went for her walk, thinking about her own thoughts. As she saw a familiar red car, she began to quickly approach the automobile. She wanted to surprise Alex, and suddenly the woman stopped like a halt. Jane inside the car saw the chosen one, but none. And with the blonde girl with whom the man was passionately kissing. The woman watched the scene for a few minutes and then turned and wandered home. Jane wanted to sob, but there were no tears. She wanted to scream, but she couldn't do that either. She came home devastated. She went silently to her room and sat down on the table. Her mother-in-law came in, who had an amazing ability to recognize the mood of the household. The pensioner immediately realized what had happened, and in a quiet voice said, "Don't be silent, tell me." "There's nothing to tell. Mom fell in love with the womanizer. Just saw him kissing in the car with a girl. And the other news is I'm not meant to have kids. That's why I didn't give you a granddaughter or grandson in my time." The daughter-in-law said in a sad voice, "You're being silly again. You gave me a granddaughter, love, and I'm grateful to you for that, and to God too. As for your boyfriend, I didn't like him right away because he didn't hurry to get acquainted with us. When a man loves, he wants to know everything about his beloved. Your boyfriend did the exact opposite. He didn't care about your family. As for the fact that you fell in love, it seems to me that it is not love, but passion, because you have been alone for a long time," the woman said and hugged her sister-in-law. The next day, Jane, against all odds, waited for a call from Alex. But there was no call from Alex, as there was for 3 more days. The woman tried to chase away the thoughts about the unfaithful chosen one, but still came back to them. Alex appeared quite unexpectedly. The man waited for Jane after work and, as if nothing had happened, reached out to kiss her. The woman pushed Alex away. He looked at her perplexed and asked for an explanation. Jane looked at the man with alienation, and after a few minutes she uttered, "Let's not play comedy. I saw you with another girl. You were having fun. I don't think we need a long explanation of that." "I didn't swear fidelity to you," replied the interlocutor nonchalantly. "Yes, you're right about that. You didn't. And that's a good thing. Otherwise, you wouldn't have kept your vows. I ask you very much not to bother me anymore. Have a good day." Dryly, the woman replied, "But you will suffer without me." Alex shouted after her, but his phrase remained unanswered. Jane proudly walked to the bus stop and thanked fate that the whole truth about the chosen one was revealed now, when she had not yet introduced him to the people close to her. True, Alex tried several more times to meet with the girl, but he was refused, and soon the man completely disappeared from the horizon. After the failed novel, Jane again closed herself in the world, where she allowed only her mother-in-law and daughter. Even her parents had no place there. Women called her mother and father less and less often, and with her sister they did not communicate at all. But Jane was satisfied. She no longer wanted to experience the disappointment of both the male sex and the stingy communication with her own parents. Time was flying rapidly. Love had already entered the 10th grade. Her mother was happy for her daughter, who studied at school, won excellent, and dreamed of becoming, like her mother, a surgeon. Jane still continued to work at the hospital and made significant progress. She was considered one of the best doctors in the city, and she was prophesied to be the chief doctor. All of this pleased Lara, except for one thing, that her sister-in-law had no other half. Jane, as always, came to work, thought that at least today there were no complicated operations, because last night she sat at the TV until midnight and did not sleep well. But her dream was not destined to come true. The bell rang and the duty officer reported a patient with a live wound to the abdomen. The woman leaned back in her chair tiredly and thought that just when you wish for something, everything goes the other way. But she said aloud to the staff, "Let's get the OR ready." Jane stood up, thinking that the working day had begun. The woman proceeded to the operating room, where a man with a live wound had already been delivered. Jane approached the patient, leaned over, and said in a friendly tone, "Don't worry, everything will be fine. We know how to do our job." The same second, the nurse pronounced, "Jane, we're all set." The doctor was just about to respond when she heard the voice of a patient lying on the operating table. This can't be happening, but still, that ugly mole on your face, and your name is Jane." After these words, the man seemed numb. He stared with his gaze at the woman in the robe. Jane flinched at the voice and looked closely at the patient. She was shocked. In front of her on the operating table lay the man who had taken her by force in a car many years ago. Jane looked at the man again. The woman could not believe her eyes. Her gaze moved to the patient's hands, where she saw a tattoo she would never forget. There was Archie's inscription and her bite mark. She'd bitten him then, and she fisted him afterward. Jane recoiled from the man, shivering involuntarily. The nurses looked at her in amazement and didn't realize what was going on. Jane walked out of the operating room and sank helplessly onto the couch. She remembered the prophetic words of her grandmother who said, "You will meet your abuser again, and how you will deal with him will depend only on you." The woman looked down at the floor, unable to believe that this was all happening. His words about his grandmother had come true. On the operating table lay the man who had abused her, and his life depended on her actions. Jane realized that she could make one deliberately awkward move and this scoundrel's life would be cut short. But the woman realized something else as well. She had taken the Hippocratic Oath, and it could not be broken. She was distracted from her thoughts by the nurse's voice. "Jane, you're all right. You just came out so abruptly and turned pale. We thought you were sick." "I'm fine. Give the patient anesthesia, and I'll be right there," the woman said, trying not to let her voice betray her excitement. She had already made up her mind that she would save this scoundrel's life. After all, he had already been punished by fate. Someone had stabbed him. With these thoughts, Jane entered the operating room and began her work. 2 hours later, Jane sat in the resident's room, staring at one point. She had just saved a villain's life. Suddenly, she felt a sudden uneasiness in her soul. Jane didn't know what was happening, but her head began to spin. And then there was a vision. Trouble would happen to her daughter. She remembered that Love had told her that she was going with her friends to the court to skate. The next instant, the woman rushed for her cell phone, dialed her mother-in-law's number, and hearing Lara's voice, screamed in a broken voice, "Love, you're still home. Why are you so worried?" Pensioner Mom pronounced, "Under no pretext, do not let her out of the house today, do you hear me? If you have to, lock her in her room. I'll tell you all about it later. You understand me?" cried Jane excitedly. I do. She sat down on the couch and said she would tell everything later as she had no energy now, so she went to lie down in her room. In the evening of the same day, she was awakened by her daughter, who was all in tears. The mother looked at Love and asked her to explain to the girl what had happened. The daughter, in an interrupted voice, reported, "It's so good that you didn't let me go to the court. My classmates were crossing the road, and an SUV jumped out and hit them at full speed. One girl died on the spot, and the other girl is in intensive care. I just got this from the class teacher on the phone." At that moment, Lara came into the room and said quietly, "You saved your daughter and my granddaughter today. Thank you. Is that why you were yelling on the phone today? Did you have a premonition of trouble?" Jane listened and then cried quietly. Her mother-in-law rushed over to comfort her daughter-in-law, and so did Love. Meanwhile, Jane thought of the word foreboding. After all, another event that Nickel had predicted had happened. Jane had gained the very gift her grandmother had spoken of, and it was facilitated by meeting the man who had wronged her years ago. It was when she saw him that she experienced a strong sense of fear and loathing. Jane hugged her loved ones, whispered that it was all behind her and they would be fine. She really believed it, as her grandmother had said it many times too. That night, the woman dreamed that soon there would be drastic changes in her life. In the morning, the woman went to work. In the corridor, she was met by a handsome middle-aged man. The woman looked at the stranger, and an inner voice told her that this man was your destiny. Jane smiled involuntarily, as the man was sympathetic to her. The stranger asked politely, "Hello, you Jane are the surgeon." "Yes, that's correct. What did you want?" "I thought it was you. I was told there's only one beautiful woman in this hospital with golden hands. I'm Archie's brother, the one you operated on yesterday. I want to thank you personally for saving him," the polite man said, holding out a luxurious bouquet of white roses. As soon as Jane heard who was standing in front of her, she felt an electric shock. She involuntarily recoiled from the man and strode swiftly away, leaving the stranger bewildered. The woman was refuted in shock. How could an inner voice have told her that the scoundrel's brother would be her destiny? Jane was at a loss. She liked the man, but he was related to the bandit. The woman walked with a quick step, but the stranger caught up and spoke. "I don't understand your reaction. I only wanted to thank you, and you run from me like hell from the incense." "Maybe I am, like hell," the woman said quietly. "What?" "Nothing. Give your bouquet to the nurses. They did a good job too," Jane said dryly and quickly left. All that day, the woman thought about her brother Archie. She tried to reason with herself that the man was a scoundrel, but the thought returned to him again and again. Jane was angry with herself, but she couldn't do anything about it. At the end of the day, Archie's brother was waiting for the woman near the hospital exit. He approached her resolutely and said, "My name is Chris. I gave the flowers, like you said, to the nurses. I brought you daisies. They suit you better, for you are as simple a woman at heart as these flowers. I just can't understand why you're behaving so shabbily. I'm not interested in your name. Neither are you. My job is to save people, and I have nothing to thank you for," Jane said dryly, signaling that the conversation was over. The man did not insist on continuing the conversation, but from the next day, the woman began to receive a bouquet of daisies from the messenger at work. Where was this piece of paper with the words, "Requesting an audience"? Jane was angry at Chris, and at the same time, she was pleased with the attention of Archie's brother. This went on for 10 days. The woman couldn't take it anymore and approached the intrusive groomer of herself with the words, "What are you seeking?" "Just a meeting. Just to talk," Chris calmly replied. "Your brother is not a nice man. I wouldn't want to talk to people around him," she said dryly. "Oh, that's why you treat me like that. So, according to you, you can all together under one umbrella. And what about the expression in the family is not without a freak?" The man said, not allowing the woman to answer, and continued, "Archie is not a good man, but my brother, I can't leave him in trouble. But I'd like to know what Archie did to you that you hated our whole family. Ask your brother and see if he has the courage to tell you, and no more flowers. I don't want you adding extra work to the back laborers," arrogantly said the woman and left. After this conversation, the daisies were not brought for 3 days, and Jane breathed a sigh of relief. But still she thought about her new acquaintance, and there he was. The man was waiting for the woman after work, and when he saw her, he rushed to her. He asked her not to interrupt him and to let him speak. Chris saw that Jane was hesitating, and so he spoke sharply. "I know everything. Made Archie tell me," he confessed. "What he did to you is monstrous. It's unforgivable. But believe me, I'm not like that. Give me a chance to court you. For the first time, I've met a woman I'd do anything for. And I'm not just saying that. I won't let anyone hurt you. Even if you refuse, I'll just follow your shadow. But I won't be a hindrance to you." And also Archie repents for what he has done, though it is rather late for repentance. Fate made it so that he met him again years later, and it was in your power to decide whether to let him live or not. Now the last sentence you said is like my grandmother, Jane said. She had already mentally realized that her inner voice was not wrong. This man is my destiny. The inner voice did not let the woman down. 3 months later, the couple married in the church. Lara approved of her daughter-in-law's choice. So did Love, who later called Chris her father. Jane begrudgingly forgave Archie, but she refused to see him in person. And also the woman did not tell that Love is his own niece. She thought it should remain a secret, her innermost secret.